Acting Vice Chancellor Professor James McNamee, that I'm welcoming you all to Queen's and to Riddel Hall and to the Irish Times debate final of 2018. And Queen's University Belfast is really delighted to be hosting the final of this very special all-Ireland student competition. Tonight's event is the culmination of so much work by teams and individuals from each and every university on this island. And to be here this evening, to be competing here this evening, is itself a wonderful achievement, so congratulations to all our finalists, of course. Now, the eagle-eared amongst you will have perhaps detected that I'm not originally from these parts. In fact, I was educated and spent a major part of my career at the University of Glasgow, which, as many of you will know, is a renowned centre of debating excellence, with alumni including John Smith, Donald Dewar and Charlie Kennedy. And so you'll understand that with that legacy in my own background, I'm especially eager to hear from the current generation of university debaters. And I guess that as I remember those previous generations of debaters and public servants, I'm also tempted to remember and reflect on just how important and just how special universities are. Important centres of excellence in teaching and research, important beacons of opportunity and inclusion and mobility, important spaces for scholarly conversations that transcend disciplines and borders and even time. Special places of committed and informed and relevant conversations. At this time, all of our universities are under unprecedented levels of public and government scrutiny, and certainly as beneficiaries of public investment, we must be open to public challenge and review. And it has to be the integrity, the quality, the creativity, the meaningfulness of what we do that will ensure our institutional and individual relevance to and leadership in our changing societies and communities. And of course, the skills of debate, the skills of communication, the skills of spirited engagement that we're all anticipating from this evening's speakers are absolutely the ones that we want for all our students, all our graduates. Those are absolutely the skills that we want them to develop, to demonstrate, and to use. And so on behalf of Queen's University Belfast, I'm delighted to welcome the Irish Times Debating Final 2018 to this special place of learning, to this place of conversation and engagement and debate. And I believe that Calvin Black from Literific will now add another word or two of welcome. Calvin.
Thank you very much, Professor Scullion. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, one and all. And allow me to be approximately the 169th person to welcome you to this, the final of the Irish Times debate at Queen's University Belfast, hosted by the Literary and Scientific Society. Woo! Yes, that is the appropriate response. It is so good to see all of you here. Congratulations to all of the finalists seated before us, and thank you very much to the judges and to the Right Honourable Lord Judge for taking time out of their busy schedules to appear. I just want to say a very quick and brief few words about the Literific, as it is more colloquially known. The Society was founded in 1850 by our Lord and Saviour E.L. Godkin, and yes, it flourished for many years until approximately the 1960s, when, due to a combination of factors, which to the public means the rising tensions as a result of the Troubles and the general devolving of debates at the Society into sectarian magazine contests, but to those in the know, what it actually means is because of a former president stealing a copious amount of alcohol from the butt, and then the president after him stripping down to the waist and challenging someone to a fist fight, the Society was disbanded for a great many years. It resurfaced in 2011 thanks to a fantastic man by the name of Paul Francis Shannon, and it has flourished ever since. This is the 169th session, and yes, it has been a fantastic year, and the privilege of hosting this debate is most certainly the cherry on top of that. So I'd like to thank specifically Janet from the Irish Times and Janine, the convener, for giving us the opportunity to do so. So thank you very much to them for that. Very much so the least interesting person who will be speaking this evening, so allow me to hand over to someone much more interesting, the convener of this debate, Ms. Janine Ryan.
Stood somewhere a little bit closer so you all didn't have to wait for me to get up here. Good evening, everyone. You are very, very welcome. Calvin thought that he had the honour of being the last person to welcome you. I'm pleased to continue that great trait and welcome you all to this, the 58th final or 58th year of the Irish Times debate, and indeed our grand final this evening. I won't keep you too long, and indeed you'll hear from me again later on, so in case you thought that this was very brief and very untoward of me not to thank everyone, you'll be stuck listening to me for a little while later. But there are a couple of duties that fall to me this evening, so I want to introduce you all to our esteemed judging panel, and then outline the running order for this evening, just so you're all aware of what to expect. So, without any further ado, we have a wonderful judging panel who have kindly come up or travelled and given up their Friday evening to adjudicate this debate this evening for us. Presiding, we have Mr. Paul O'Neill, the current editor of the Irish Times. He will be more than ably assisted by Professor Adrienne Scullion, Pro Vice Chancellor for Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences here at Queen's University Belfast. Ms. Margaret Elliott, CBE, founding partner of the Elliott Trainer Partnership Solicitors and Governor of the Irish Times Trust. Professor Brent Northall, Chair of Communications, Cara College, Montana, founder of Pax Rutarga, and most importantly, I think, to our finalists in particular here this evening, the organiser of the grand prize that our winners will take home of a 5-week tour around the United States. And last but by no means least, Mr. Ross O'Mahony, a winner of this competition in 2016. I hope you'll all forgive my slightly untoward notes, but I would like to assure you that clipboard has seen us all through an entire season of Irish Times debate, so I couldn't really leave it behind. The speakers actually probably recognise it at this stage. Just to let you all know the format, I'm conscious that our speakers at this point, I would really dearly hope actually are familiar with it, but I'm conscious that a number of people in the room may not be. As you will have noticed, we have 12 speakers. Our speakers consist of 2 teams on either side and 2 individuals. Proceedings for the evening will operate. We will start with the first teams on either side, move on to the second team, and the first speaker from each team will speak in those cases. We will then move on to the individual portion of the debate, where individuals will speak, and then we will come back up to the top, where we will hear from the second speakers from each team. The speeches will be 7 minutes in length. They will be timed by Mr. Kelvin Black here to my right. So after 1 minute you will hear a bell, and that means that protected time is now over for the moment. After 6 minutes you will hear another single bell. That means that we are once again in protected time. And after 7 minutes you will hear a double bell, which means the speakers really should draw their remarks to a close. And if they are still speaking at 7:15, we will hear a triple bell. Just to clarify what protected time means, and unprotected time more importantly, during the end of the first minute and before the beginning of the last minute, points of information may be offered. However, I emphasise only from the speakers on the other side of the debate. So before anyone thinks this is their grand opportunity to have their say, anyone who has any fine opinions on the motion, very happy to hear them later on, but we'll leave the points of information mid-speech to the speakers in our debate this evening. Without any further ado, All that remains for me to say is to wish all of our speakers the very, very, very best of luck and to hand you over to our chair for the evening, the Right Honourable Lord Justice Stevens. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Ben Stevens. I have the great privilege and honour of chairing this debate. And if I may say so, to get the show on the road. And can I start by saying that I apologise if I mispronounce any name of any of the debaters this evening. I know from my own personal experience how irritating that can be. One of my given names is Saint, and on every formal occasion that name has had to be announced, it's always been pronounced Singe. And so I do apologise if I mispronounce any name of any of the debaters. My function is to introduce the debaters in turn, and I'm ably assisted by the Timekeeper on Gilligan. So, without more ado, I'll introduce Sandi and Ndebele from UCD and LNH to propose the motion. The House believes that Parliament has failed its youth.
Nailed it. That's exactly right. So, right. Still keeping myself moving out. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again for the 600th time. When myself and Kevin got this motion for the first time, we laughed for like half an hour. Like, this House believes Ireland has failed its youth. This sort of privileged group of young people from Ireland's top universities have been failed, right? We just had a wine reception. I look fantastic right now. I look like a rapper who's dressed up really nice for the Grammys. Kevin looks like my talentless, equally rich and somewhat exploitative manager. Right? This is Ireland. He looks like it's his day at the races. Look at him. He's like Colchi dressed up all dapper. And here's the best one. If we can prove that we've been failed, if we can prove that these young people have been failed, we have a right good moment and we do it well, we get to go to America for 5 weeks for free. Isn't that fantastic? The irony is great. Judges, I think we should win just for the candidate. But is it true? Like, note that Ireland is a rich, developed first world country. This is important because our expectations must reflect this, right? It's like, do you know what it's like? It's like when you applaud your mate for doing a cartwheel drunk outside Coppers, but then scoff when an Olympic gymnast can't land a double front flip to a triple twist. Expectations are dependent entirely on context. I watched half an hour of gymnastics for that one joke. I regret nothing. So we must judge Ireland as the capable, developed country it's been since the Celtic Tiger. It's with this consideration that we believe that Ireland has failed its youth. Specifically, a failure to use our resources to plan ahead, but more importantly, an inability to adapt our culture around key issues for modern times. Right? Nowhere are these failures more glaringly obvious than in the issues of housing and mental health, right? So it's no surprise to anyone that there's a housing crisis in Ireland. The impact of the housing crisis on young people specifically is threefold, right? Firstly, there are the thousands of young people who can't afford the rent to move away from home to go to university, right? This means that many of them have to forego higher education entirely. Like, this puts them at a significant disadvantage in a job market where even a Trinity Arts degree can't get you a job at Starbucks, right? So I couldn't resist, I'm sorry. But secondly, there are the thousands more who scrape what little they can and what little cramped accommodation, and whose grades, physical and mental health suffer as a result, many of whom have to drop out as a result. It's difficult and somewhat ironic to be studying the fundamentals of thermodynamics while your teeth chatter in a freezing bedroom, right? And finally, let's say you're one of the lucky ones, right? You make it out of college with your shiny new degree, except the best jobs are in the cities. You're now forced to rent from a landlord who could replace you in days and therefore charges anything. And you can't afford the arm, leg and firstborn child to put down a deposit for a house, and you're now locked out of the housing market. You're denied not just a house, but a home. That's important. A home allows you to settle and become part of a community, right? The Irish promises of a community that you can feel a part of. not a rented house that you can feel exploited in. This is really important because it is evidence of a lack of forward planning. Like, we built houses, we built loads of houses, we just didn't build them where anyone would want to live, right? As a nation, there was a time when we had the money and even the time to avoid this, like money to strategically build houses for the people who needed them then and the people who need them now. This lack of foresight epitomizes Ireland's failure. We failed to plan. Housing is only one example, right? We could point to our continued waste of useful resources like copper or like helium, or the 1,000 confirmed young people who are homeless in Ireland today. All issues which show a complacency in planning for the future. The worst part isn't that this is happening. The worst part is that we could have avoided it. For the love of God, lads, we spent €4 million on the Spire, right? Like Kevin explained it to me as a glorified North Star for cultures who are lost in Dublin. Right? So, 20 years ago, we could never have envisioned a housing crisis in Ireland. Yet here we are. I'll take a point now.
Do you think that 20 years ago we could have envisioned the kind of rapid economic growth and unprecedented growth that Ireland has seen since?
I think not even 20 years ago, even in the years after when the growth started, we could have planned. We would have known that rapid economic growth equals people moving to cities, equals people getting jobs, equals more people going to universities, equals people needing houses at university. It's quite simple sort of logic, right? So, moving on to our second point, how our culture has failed to adapt to modern times. I started off this speech by pointing out how great we all look, right? How privileged we all appear. That's the key word, appear. Irish people are known all over the world for being happy-go-lucky, sort of pleasant people. We've come to expect that from even ourselves. We're great, right? We've managed to make drink an integral part of our culture, right? And we're simply great crack. Here's the thing though. Talking about mental health or depression isn't really conducive to having the crack, right? It's something that we don't want to do as a people. Talking about domestic abuse or alcoholism is uncomfortable for us. As soon as deeper issues are raised, we freeze. This only feeds further into the lack of foresight I mentioned earlier, right? For example, social media. Social media has a profound effect on young people and our mental health. It's brought about complex issues with like self-esteem or fear of missing out or cyberbullying. It's a nuanced subject that even older generations don't understand, but we're left to fend for ourselves. Yet we've only now begun to discuss it. It's the reason why it takes so long to enact change in this country. Like, look at same-sex marriage or the AIDS, right? This hurts young people. It means we fail to discuss and understand the issues that we have, right? A huge alcoholism problem in young people, or like high suicide rates among young males, shouldn't really be surprising when we've raised them in a society that continuously and historically pushes these issues under the carpet. When we insist on maintaining this attitude and passing it on to our youth, we minimize our awareness. Like, why should our institutions or our leaders care when we pretend everything is okay? It is here that we failed. We failed to prioritize these issues, to dedicate the resources required to deal with them, and we failed to change. Imagine the brilliant discussion the 12 debaters up here could have about drink culture, and imagine if that discussion happened across all of Ireland, right? We're not ungrateful. The proposition and indeed the youth of Ireland don't expect a utopia. We simply expect to progress. We expect to move past the problems that held us back 20 years ago. We expect to meet the challenges of our future with a culture that has adjusted to the issues that we have in modern times. We have by no means given up. This competition by itself shows you that Ireland has a bright future, that the young people of Ireland have a bright future. However, as we face the defining battles of our generation, whether it be homelessness or alcoholism or mental health, it's sad to think that much of it could have been avoided. It's devastating to know and to see that the battles of the past are still the battles of the future. Right? We as young people will not fail Ireland, but it's sad to think that Ireland failed us. Happy to propose.
I'd like now to invite Niamh Egleston to nail it on behalf of the opposition to the motion.
Honourable Chair, adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen. The dream that built the Ireland that passed marriage equality and made young gay people in this country feel for the first time that they might have a place where they belonged began with the Civil Service White Paper, in 1958. Bear with me. They want to take 3 years of Irish history without any historical context and tell you that this country has failed. In opening opposition, we want to give you more. In 1958, Ireland was the poorest country in Western Europe. Its laws and values represented the very most backwards dogma of the Catholic Church. It was repressed, benighted, and inward-looking. But in 1958, T.K. Whitaker wrote the programme for economic expansion, criticising unprogressive isolation and outlining the vision that would become Ireland's national philosophy. He dreamed the Irish dream, the dream of an open, cosmopolitan Ireland where problems were discussed rather than swept under the carpet, where young people would be citizens of the world as well as of their own country. Ladies and gentlemen, countries are more than groups of people or hunks of land. Countries are a common purpose. They are the ideas that drive us forward together. Where America has the American dream, equally we have ours. The celebrations that accompanied the passage of marriage equality were not just because gay people could finally marry for the first time in their own country, but because the referendum represented a pivotal moment for the Irish people and equally the Irish dream. The dream that was first outlined in that white paper in 1958. And our proposition, they gives a laundry list of today's problems, but in reality, most of those things are getting better. Mental health issues are better funded and better understood than they ever have been before. And there is a housing crisis, but this is symptomatic of the fact that 10 years after the biggest global financial crisis since the Great Depression, our country is booming once more, with 2 landmark referendums in 4 years, both of which were driven by youth activism. Ireland's young people are more politically empowered than they ever have been. But I don't want to shy away from the hard truth, and the hard truth is that wherever there are people, there is suffering. This should not obscure the fact that fewer people in this country are suffering than ever before, and with every passing decade, that number becomes less and less. This debate should not be about competing lists of wins and losses, nor should it be about one bad decision the government made in 2002. It's about the course of our development as a nation, from where we began to the Irish dream and where that has brought us. Ireland's young people are today the most politically empowered of all time. And for as long as that is the case, and we continue on our long walk toward progress, Ireland has not failed. So to begin, to understand the trajectory of that dream, we have to look back to where we began. And where we began is very far behind where we are now. In 1958, lobbying was done by archbishops as opposed to young activists. And children like Anne Lovett died, tired and cold and alone, under the statue of the Virgin at Grenard. Ireland was not just closed off culturally from the rest of the world, but also economically, with protectionist trade policies that made Ireland one of the poorest countries in Europe. Instead of trying to change the system, young Irish people ran to new ones, giving us one of the highest rates of youth emigration in the world. That was our beginning. Our only ideals were reactions to colonial oppression. We were a fledgling, failing democracy, and the country with no direction. It was against this backdrop that the Irish dream was dreamt, and it is with this as our starting point that we must measure its success. No thank you. For as long as our nation has truly been a nation, the guiding principle behind public life has been that Irish dream, the belief that an open Ireland, economically, socially and politically, is the best position to improve itself over time. It has driven national policies, it has driven op-eds in the Irish Times. It was the reasoning behind so many of our referendums in the 80s and 90s, our low corporate tax rate, our membership of the EU. It single-handedly wrote 12 seasons of Reading in the Years. And it sells a bowl of unwanted shamrock to rot on the Oval Office mantelpiece every March. It was the philosophy behind the government's Northern Ireland policy, which involved promoting progressive politics to bring an end to violence, culminating in the Good Friday Agreement. Bertie Ahern, before he left office, addressed US Congress and declared that Ireland was at peace. Young people on both sides of the border will no longer be born into a place wrecked by conflict, a prisoner of its own past. They will be born into a place that is moving constantly forward. Today's young people have been born to a country which is free and safe and rich all at the same time, among the few nations today who can say so. Very good.
So, Since the end of the Troubles, more people in Northern Ireland have committed suicide than any people ever died during the Troubles. Is that not a failure because of the things that Sandi talked about, because we failed to plan for these type of issues?
First of all, the failure to plan for those kind of issues is a historical failure. But second of all, I don't think that one failure at one moment in time means that you should write off the history of the country in its entirety. What I would say is the real win there is that first of all the Troubles have ended, and that second of all we have a well-funded health service that is beginning to account for those things, that young people know they exist and that they can agitate for change in a way that they never have done before. That is the direct result of the policies that we talk about. Without those policies and without those agitations, we wouldn't even talk about the issue of suicide in the first place. And that, we think, is what's most important. All of this has not been a coincidence. It's almost wholly the consequence of the Irish dream. And if the proposition want to argue that that dream has failed, they need to explain why Ireland without it would have done any better. In reality, if the dreamers had rejected it, Ireland now would be most likely similar to Ireland then. And imagine what growing up in that Ireland would have been like. If instead of opening up our economy and joining the EU, we had been bogged down in pointless trade wars and tariffs. If we had never been boosted by foreign industries and never advanced our own alongside them. The opening of our country was a concerted national effort that spans decades. Without it, we would have almost none of the liberties that we have now. Mary Robinson would not have been able to tell the women of Ireland that they rocked the system. Catherine Zappone would not have been able to propose to her wife amid cheers at Dublin Castle, and an Irish tea shop would never have been able to tell the world that today Ireland was at peace. Most importantly, any change requires a belief that change is possible, and without these things, young people would not have grown up in the spirit of openness and activism and belief of change that the Irish dream has created. Is everything perfect? Of course not. But this debate is about the past and the future just as much as it is the present. Ireland didn't start today, it didn't start tomorrow, but each day it will be better and better, because each day it will dream better and do better for its young people. We are so proud to stand in opposition.
My privilege to introduce as part of the UCD law team our next speaker, Cian Leahy.
Hello friends. So, to get into the mindset for this debate, I tried to imagine what it might be like if I had kids. You know, if I had youth of my own to be responsible for. And I went to my girlfriend and I asked her this. And once I reassured her that this wasn't like a short-term, imminent plan of mine, which was quite a concern, she was like, Cian, that would be a disaster. Like, you live on a diet of frozen pizza and Chinese takeaways. You know that you can't get like a baby food version of a chicken curry and chips, don't you? I was like, okay, fair enough. That's a good point. But you know what I would do? I would try. I would learn how to tie shoelaces at last so I could tie theirs. I would learn to cook. I would learn how those weird fiddly baby grows things go on. And I would hope that they know that I would always do whatever I needed to do for them. And that there was one thing that I wouldn't do. That I wouldn't allow myself to profit from their suffering. That I would not exploit their suffering for my gain, that they would know that I cared about them more than I cared about my God, my wealth, or my power. Those are all things that I intend to talk about today, not things that are currently in my possession. I'm not sure if you can have a God in your possession. That would be really cool. And because there's a reason that people went silent as I started to talk about that. Because presumably everyone in this room can accept that that at least is a fundamental level beyond which we shall not go. That if we do nothing else to our youth, we at least will not exploit them for our own gain. And that's hopefully something we can unite behind on both sides of this debate. But here's the thing about failure. Because it's a very strange concept indeed for opposition to say that a debate that's about whether Ireland has failed its youth, like it's all about the youth of today, right now. Particularly when Niamh tells us that this debate is about the past and the present. We agree, Niamh. But the honest thing that I think as I listen to her is that it sounds, no thanks Niamh, is that it sounds like one of those games. I don't know if you were playing football as a kid, right? And then you had to go into your own house with dinner or something, and you said last goal wins. And you're there like, well, wait a minute, I'm 3-1 up. Last goal wins, I was never 3-1 up. Last goal wins seems pretty unfair there. But all opposition want to talk about is that things have turned out all right in the last few years. That's not okay. That doesn't recognise the great suffering that Ireland has done. The motion is not that Ireland is failing its youth in the here and now. Aodhán and I are proud to take the long picture. Partly we think it's a more interesting debate for you, our beloved audience, and our equally beloved judges, but also because context is king. And the problems of the youth didn't begin in 2002 or 1958. Ireland failing its youth is an age-old pattern. It was there long before anyone in this room was born. If I'm wrong about that, then you're looking great for your age. And it will probably, unless we acknowledge it, be there long after we leave. But our problem is not that bad things happen to children. It's that these were all too avoidable things, and the reason we didn't avoid them was because it would have been inconvenient for us to do so. Let's take a look right from the beginning. The first task of any fledgling state is to build social institutions, education, healthcare, a supportive society. And what did we do? We jumped at the chance so that the Catholic Church had unfettered control over Irish youth, because that seemed like a pretty cheap price to pay in return for footing the bill. Because we had an image of ourselves, and we were proud of it. We were a God-fearing Catholic nation of comely maidens dancing at crossroads. Every time I hear that, I'm like, that sounds really dangerous. Why are they dancing at crossroads? That's the way they're failing the youth. Terrible traffic safety. But there was no room in that Ireland for a frightened, pregnant teenage girl. There was no room in that Ireland for her child born out of wedlock. And there was no room in that Ireland for a frightened young boy who didn't understand what was happening to him, and who, when he went to people, found himself ignored because we cared more about our proud Catholic image than about our own children. And we might be tolerant. No, thank you guys. We might be willing to accept that as just being the past. If it hadn't been, as Niamh told you, that Anne Lovett died in 1984 in a grotto in Granard, if it hadn't been that the last Magdalen laundry was closed in 1994, and if we weren't still fighting efforts by survivors to get compensation, or if it hadn't been that that wasn't reserved to our God, but we moved on, as they tell us, and we found a new God, wealth, the economy. And here's the thing, they talk about things you spent money on. It's easy to spend money on everyone when things are going good. But it's when times are hard that you see where someone's priorities truly lie. And in every economic crisis we ever had in this country, we saw unemployment shoot up. And who was it who left the country? You never saw Charlie Hockey or Brian Cowan standing on a ferry, watching everything they loved recede into the distance. Like, I haven't seen Sing Street, guys. Spoilers, right? The triumphant happy ending is that they're leaving Ireland on a tiny boat that's definitely going to sink by the way. That's beside the point. That's a judgment on 1980s Ireland, if ever there was one. Because we don't think that Ireland has failed its youth just because it has some unemployment. We think it has failed the youth because youth unemployment is consistently twice the rate of general unemployment. And we all accept this as just being normal. Please, go.
Do you think that that vision of Ireland would have ever gotten better if we had never opened ourselves up to the influence of the EU or the outside world, or persisted with a diabolically closed economy?
Niamh, our problem is not that we suddenly did some good things. Here's the thing. Everyone benefited from that. It's easy to take decisions when there aren't winners or losers. Aodhán and I's case is that when there were winners and losers, the youth were always the losers, and that is shameful, and we should all be ashamed of Ireland's track record on that. And if you want one more example of the truth of that statement, you don't need to do any more than walk out those doors and take a look at what you find. You'll find a city which has more peace walls dividing Catholic and Protestant neighbourhoods now than it did when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. You'll find a city, and indeed a province, in which thousands of children, the vast majority, still attend segregated schooling, failed by a society and a leadership which cares more about maintaining their own power structures. Because as long as those lines between communities are sharp, the DUP and the Sinn Féin can go to their constituents and say, you need us, because otherwise the others are coming for you. As those lines fade, so do their power. And they use children as sectarian pawns to propagate that. And then I say, Aodhán, I say that that is failure. And Niamh tells us that it's okay because at least the troubles are over and that's a victory. Surely there comes a point when it is not okay to say that at least we're not shooting ourselves in the streets. Surely there's a higher standard we can hold ourselves to. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand why you'd want to believe opposition. It's comforting to think we haven't made mistakes. But admitting failure isn't the end. Admitting failure allows you to move forward, allows us to be better. We don't think Ireland is hopeless. We think there's a potential here if we can accept where we went wrong. We are so proud to stand tonight in Proposition.
I'm delighted to ask and invite Daniel Gilligan now on behalf of the TCD HIST team.
Everyone's talking about what it really means to fail. Feels like my evening cert results night. Except there are actually some people who aren't my mum here. Although mum, what a magical night of bowling that was. Ladies and gentlemen, can we know if we failed by looking at where we are now without perspective? Is it enough for this proposition to say that because things aren't perfect for our youth, we failed them completely? Must we ignore the normal men and women of this nation who changed this island from one that was poor, obsessively traditionalist, and paralysed by fear in the face of a changing world into one that was prosperous, progressive, and open? This team from the College Historical Society would say absolutely not. In the last 100 years, there are few countries in the world that have fundamentally transformed the basis of their economy, political system, and culture like we have. And no single part of Irish society has reaped the rewards of that transformation more than our youth. I have two arguments today. Firstly, social freedom. Knowing me, knowing youth. Have we done the best we can do? Secondly, economic freedom. From coffin ship adventure to working in Accenture. Under that first argument with respect to social freedom. Thank you very much. About 100 years ago, a fellow you might know by the name of Jim Joyce, some people call him James Joyce, I'm just kind of, I know him better, said that history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake. A nightmare from which I'm trying to awake. The history he knew was one where Irish young people were subjugated by other countries, oppressed by religious tradition, and shackled by poverty. 100 years on, that history is just that, history, and not a lived reality. The fact it isn't a lived reality is because of the courage of everyday Irish people who took enormous risks, challenged unchallengeable institutions, and had the vision to believe that things must be better. No thank you. They did all that, and they won. These people were Ireland. These people are Ireland. It is those people, not the church, not the banks, not the vested interests of political elites, who this proposition must accuse of failure. What were the sacrifices those ordinary people, as well as T.J. Whittaker, made, and what do they mean for the youth of today? First, Ireland has one of the strongest democracies in the world. Irish young people can say what they like, are empowered to vote in regular referendums, and can choose their representatives with one of the fairest systems known to democracy. I am, of course, talking about that sweet, sweet single transferable vote. We can't immediately implement all the policies young people demand, but nowhere is the ability of young people to make those demands and have them listened to greater. This was never an inevitability. Ireland was born at a time when democracies were crumbling across Europe and fascism was on the rise. Instead of becoming a victim to that trend, Ireland's people and their leaders consistently chose the path of democracy, of freedom, and in the aftermath of a bitter civil war, conciliation. Fast forward to 2015. Support for marriage equality amongst young people across the world was incredibly, incredibly high. But Ireland was the only country to allow its people give an answer on that question through popular vote. It was the first country to do so. No thank you. Moreover, for much of the 20th century, the Catholic Church controlled Irish life. From parish priests ostracising you from the community for not turning up to Mass, to Archbishop John Charles McQuaid infecting the ideological character of our Constitution, all the way to the Magdalene laundries. The young people of this country had their paths in life dictated to them by an unimpeachably powerful, unelected institution. Ireland had the immense bravery to stand up to that institution against all the odds. Ireland's bravery can be seen in Marie Collins, who among countless other victims called out the institution that had scarred them so desperately and which they knew had the power to do so again if they spoke up. It can be seen in the women of the Irish Women's Liberation Front, who risked arrest, who risked ridicule to bring contraception from the north to the south and make it clear how egregious it was for the Catholic Church to dictate sexual morality to our country's people. It can be seen in Mary Robinson, who was lambasted by the mainstream press and political elites for holding a pro-choice position at a time when that position was deeply unpopular. What did the Irish people do? They recognised her integrity, they turned around and they elected her president. Finally, we must acknowledge people all over this island, but particularly those in Northern Ireland, who after decades of sectarian violence chose to put aside animosity and come to the negotiation table. People on both sides who'd lost children, who'd lost parents. Those people had the immense selflessness to try to forgive what for many of us would be totally unforgivable so that they could build a brighter future for their children. Tonight, we are those children, the first generation in a long time to grow up with peace on this island. All these people have paved the way for an island where young people are free to live their lives as they see fit and where the possibilities for Irish society are limited only by the scope of our ambition. On to our second argument with respect to economic freedom. No, thank you. This country's economic decisions have consistently prioritised the future and those young people who are likely to occupy it. The Ireland my grandparents grew up in was one where most Irish people had to choose between working for little money in the same job that their parents worked in, the same job that their grandparents worked in, or leaving Ireland and facing exploitation and discrimination in a country which was as scary to them as the instability of Bitcoin is to us plugged-in entrepreneurial teams. Both within Ireland's borders and outside them, today's young people are more empowered to create lives of their own choosing than any generation that has come before. Why is this the case? And I'll take Aodhán.
You don't like our list of failings, and you just give us a list of successes. Presumably they're not the only things that matter. So tell us this. What would Ireland have had to do to fail at you?
Well, all of the failures that you mentioned, our case suggests that a lot of them aren't to do with normal Irish people, the people who make up Ireland. They're to do with the church, which is an internationally imposed and historically entrenched institution. They're to do with banks, which we had very little control over, which were criminal in their behaviour, which the Irish people knew nothing about. When Irish people found out about those things, Irish people made brave and difficult choices. Our case is a case about the normal people who actually make up Ireland, and not just those at the top. It is therefore one that is more comprehensive than your one. Within Ireland's borders and outside it, today's young people are more empowered to create lives of their own choosing than any generation that has come before. Why? Within our borders, we've consistently prioritised the urban over the rural, the innovative over the traditional, high-skilled services over agriculture. As a strategy for economic development, that's a young person's game. That said, emigration has always been a fact of Irish life. The young people of Ireland's past who sought a better life were forced to board coffin ships, which, aside from everything else, were incredibly poorly branded. Today's youth are welcomed into positions of prosperity in Dubai instead of poverty in Philadelphia. This happened because where once only the most privileged could access secondary school, now we have the highest proportion of school leavers entering third-level institutions in Europe. We invested massively into our young people and gave them the education they needed to weather even the toughest of economic storms. Countless Irish people over the past 100 years not only didn't fail us, they gave us more than they ever owed us. Incredibly happy to have us.
Now I'd like to welcome Russell Mann, representing Literific, Queen's University, Belfast.
How do you fail a nation's youth? You can ruin them economically. You can destroy their prospects of ever owning a home. You can bog them down in political institutions so inherently absurd that they're driven into bitter apathy. This is all true, and you've heard fine points from the team from UCD regarding that. However, it appears that our opposition team is obsessed with economics. You can fail people outside of economic factors. Indeed, as I see it, the primary way in which you can fail a nation's youth is by failing to pass on an appreciation for the nation itself. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my solemn opinion that by failing to sufficiently pass on and embrace its cultural heritage, Ireland has failed its youth and abandon them to the abyss of globalistic homogeneity. In doing this, I'm going to highlight how Ireland has failed its youth by failing to pass on its language, failing to initiate a greater cultural revival on the island, and I'll also go into detail as to why these particular failings are amongst the most egregious. Ladies and gentlemen, the Irish language is a running joke. Amongst the youth of the Irish nation, it's little more than a thankless chore thrust upon us for 14 years of our education, then swiftly discarded and forgotten. The vocabulary of the average citizen stretches little beyond cock-a-millish, geogwitch, and who could forget the classic on no Celtic on double G. We've normalised this cultural ignorance, but when you stop and think about it, it's a little sad. Outside of the terrifying fogged-cloaked lands of the Gaeltacht, there is no Irish. Sure, you see it on signs and buses, no thank you. But in reality, it's just not there. We've learned to filter it out. Every day we walk past and ignore the shadow of a language we should be embracing. It exists, but it exists beneath our notice. And this is the true way in which Ireland has failed its youth. Regarding language, because surely you could argue this is a global problem, an unfortunate fact of modern life. Indigenous languages are swept aside to make the way for globalised lingua francas. Or at least that's the excuse we've been using. The reality doesn't quite hold up. Language experts put Irish fluency somewhere around 3%. Yet all across Europe we see instances of people being able to speak both their native language and English. Bilingualism is encouraged where we ignore it. Even the Welsh have a fluency rating of somewhere around 11%. Were we to look at how other countries are promoting their native languages instead of rehashing our tried and failed methods for it, we may have a chance. But as it stands, ladies and gentlemen, we're being beaten by the bloody Welsh. It's dead in Anam only. But Ireland has failed its youth by failing to pass it on properly to future generations. However, Ireland's failure to its youth reaches far beyond its disregard for its language and extends into an overarching failure to pass on and adapt Irish cultural heritage as a whole. The Irish state has failed not just the youth you see before you tonight, but generation upon generation of Irish youth. Look, for example, to the GAA, an organisation with a reputation as little more than a cynical money-making racket. Half its funding ends up in Dublin, and the organisation is constantly bombarded with allegations of corruption and match-fixing. Groups such as this should be championing. Go ahead.
Do you not think that people's love of the game of GAA that they play for free is part of their love for the Irish tradition and the Irish culture that you say that we don't have?
And I'm saying that in that particular instance, whenever this culture is embraced in any instance, such as the GAA, it ends up corrupt. However, as I'm going to go on to, it more often than not is not embraced at all. Groups such as this should be championing a contemporary Gaelic revival amongst the youth, and are instead prime examples of how such efforts, in their inadequacy, are failing the youth. Look to how Ireland has failed to pass on its cultural heritage in regards to music. Your average Irish youth bops along to the like of Drake and Taylor Swift, whilst through what isn't necessarily their own fault, they have zero familiarity with our rich musical tradition. As far as they're concerned, the rocky road to Dublin is the N4. Once again, you could respond to this by blaming globalisation. Say it's a problem everywhere, there's nothing that can be done, and leave it at that. However, in reality, this is little more than an excuse we've come up with to make us feel better about our failure. Even in the face of this rampant globalisation, or perhaps more accurately, Americanisation, countries such as Indonesia have been fighting back. Their indigenous genre of dangdut is most popular amongst the youth, and outperforms pop music by some 20%. The reason is that in the face of global homogeny, people have fought back and actively adapted traditional stylings to be more pleasing to a contemporary audience. In matters of passing on cultural heritage, Ireland has failed its youth by being too rigid, then immediately capitulating to Americanisation and pretending there was never a fight to begin with. We have failed to adapt culturally, and as such have failed to pass on our culture to the youth. My examples have focused primarily upon music and sport, but all across the world we see instances of people fighting back and adapting their native cultures to create unique art forms and activities which can be celebrated by the youth. Look to India's Bollywood film industry, for example. The industry is beloved by the Indian youth and unites them over something that their people have created. Where's Ireland's dangdut? Where's Ireland's Bollywood? The truth is that Ireland has failed to institute any form of adaptive, large-scale, contemporary Gaelic revival, and as such has failed its youth on a cultural front. First Op has lauded you with the supposed benefits of over-globalisation, but I'm going to round off my argument here by talking to you all about why Ireland failing to pass on its language and cultural heritage to its youth is such a major issue. In the words of Take That, never forget where you've come here from. The Irish cultural heritage is amongst the most rich and iconic cultural heritages in the world. In our failure to pass it on, we resign ourselves to being little more than America light. I love the Irish dream. I'm all for it. However, I don't want to see it become homogenized and over-Americanized to the point where it's indistinguishable from the American dream. It is both a waste and a major failure to be in possession of such a rich cultural history and to do nothing to pass it on. The political disillusionment we see amongst our youth today can, in my mind, be traced directly back to our lack of a strong, coherent Irish identity, as much as it can be linked to outstanding socio-economic factors. Ladies and gentlemen, we have allowed the Emerald Isle to grow scuffed and scratched through our carelessness. We have left it on the mantelpiece to gather dust, and should we not take it down and polish it soon, it may very well never glimmer for us again. Our language is unappreciated, our culture is unadaptive, and our Irish identity is in tatters. Ireland has undoubtedly failed its youth. Thank you.
Of introducing Lewis Shanahan on behalf of UCC Philosophical to oppose the motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow debaters, and honourable adjudicators, so it's come to this. 12 college students mandated by a national paper, the Journal of Record in fact, to slag off the parenting abilities of a single mother. Alas, Aaron, you deserve better. You deserve better than to be ridiculed by a reenactment of a Monty Python sketch. I'm sure you know the one. All right, but apart from the sanitation, the medicine, education, wine, public order, irrigation, roads, a fresh water system, and public health, what has Aaron ever done for us? I might also add access to a rich cultural history to that list. The reply is rather apropos. Well, she brought peace. You deserve better because to cast judgment upon our dear mother Erin through such an accountancy is unfair, for it guarantees her failure. It guarantees her failure as it would any other state. For against arbitrary and idealised standards, any country would fail. The number of young suicides in Ireland is unacceptable, undoubtedly. But how many exactly is an acceptable number of suicides? The number of homeless children in Ireland is absolutely unacceptable, but surely any non-zero number is unacceptable. Success exists nowhere by these measures. Go ahead.
In that case, why don't you tell us what failure would look like?
What a failure would look like is children who don't have any hope for the future at all across Ireland, and that's the point I'll get to later. Now it is fair to say, well, we should be doing more, but this is similarly flawed. Just how much more and how? Should we drain funding from sports and the arts perhaps, and pledge to build a home for every homeless person in Ireland? Obvious candidates for the chop at first blush, perhaps. But should we make redundant or unfunded those employed by the state? Kill the local sports clubs which give meaning, ambition and community to so many young women and men. Funding mental health services is not the only, nor the most important means of reducing the suicide rate. Erin does her best with imperfect knowledge of how these tough trade-offs work out. Sadly, it's called a budget and not the infinite money pot for a reason. But perhaps the proposition would suggest we do trim to the infinite money pot and say damn the balance sheet, damn the EU, and damn their Stability and Growth Pact, and simply borrow away to a well-financed mental health department and well-housed population, and condemn the future generations to intolerable debt obligations and European exile, rupture fiscal and economic stability forevermore. We've been suffering under austerity to earn stability since the recession. We cannot simply give up now. Progress takes time.
on that point.
And worse, no thank you. And worse, I'm going to shudder to use possibly the ugliest word in the English language, and eschewing for the next Fine Gael election slogan: progress takes pragmatism. Pragmatism is an ugly word, for it bids we sacrifice perfect beauty of our ideals for the garish and imperfect practicality of simply doing the best we can, of accepting one step backwards for 2 steps forwards. The attacks this week on the Good Friday Agreement exemplify this perfectly. It's not good enough. It could be more, could be better. Well, of course it could be better, but it had to be built on compromise, tentative trust, and capitulation. It is both meanings of facile and futile too, no thank you, to suggest we should have got more from that agreement. That treaty is imperfect as the peace it brought is imperfect. But it is peace, and it is progress, something that the second opposition seems to not think is worthwhile. The provision of welfare to children in Ireland is imperfect, no thank you, as it is everywhere, as is guaranteed by the imperfection and cruelty of the world we live in. But we are making progress, albeit pragmatic and incremental. We are funding housing construction while reducing national debt from 120% of GDP in 2013 to 75% today. We went from a D- for mental health service provision to youths last year to a D this year. I will not embarrass myself by calling this success, but it is progress. And in an ugly world, progress matters. So how should we judge, no thank you, so how should we judge Mother Erin's parenting? Well, progress is not a worthy metric either. It would be heinous of me to suggest that whilst children live in poverty, mere progress means success. Instead, we should judge Erin as we do any parent.
Lowering taxes again because people are working. What do you mean we're preparing people for the future?
Well, we are preparing for the future in the fact that we have free tertiary level education, and we have a huge rate of an extremely high standard of education compared to international standards. So I don't believe that is true. I believe that we must judge parents by the education their children have to innovate and create towards a better Ireland. And most importantly, by the will and the compassion their children have to fight the impossible fight towards a perfect world. And I believe that by this measure, Ireland's youths are not failed. Erin has not failed her children. We have a foundation of democracy, economic strength, and peace to build upon. We are educated, informed, and connected. And above all, we have the will. This is abundantly apparent in every march against the 8, and how young people are acting to destigmatise issues of mental health and exclusion through youth-run organisations like Spun Out, and through the reasonably absurd, yet absurdly reasonable output of the Rubber Bandits. It was evident in the fight for marriage equality, and it's evident now in the ongoing fight for LGBTQ rights, as it is in the demands for consent classes on campuses nationwide. It's clear right here in the anger of the proposition and in the optimism of the opposition. Erin's children are not failed. They are our greatest success. Very proud to oppose. Thank you.
We now look forward to Amy Crean on behalf of UCD LNH. Opposing the motion.
I'm not looking for a red Lamborghini, but I would like some support in learning to drive. And I think that that's something that we need to focus on in this debate, beyond just the tangible, beyond immigration or the housing market, although that's a disaster I only know living in Dublin and struggling to do so. This is about ideology. This is about, if it is good parenting that this nation is giving us, we should believe in ourselves. We should feel optimistic. Why is it that I, standing here at the Irish Times debate final, going to UCD, getting a law degree with every opportunity that this country could offer me handed to me, still feel a pit in my stomach when I'm asked what I'm going to do next year, because I know that whatever it is, even if I'm one of the lucky ones. Even if I get the graduate job that there's so few of, my friends won't be around me. They're all gone, they're all leaving. We've given our children an education, although I will contest the standard of that with the policies they are constantly implementing with the ratio of teachers to students, but regardless, yes, internationally it does compare well. But we come out of that education and we don't have a home anymore because we are being exported. If we have learned anything from the conversation around the 8th, it's that we can no longer export our problems. We need to provide for them here, and we're not. But going beyond the tangible, going to the psychological, how is Ireland rearing its children? Ironically enough, I know that the church has been brought up by the other side. That is something that we have broken away from, and that is so fantastic. It had a chokehold on the nation, and we have been the generation to witness its downfall. And I'm not here to be a fan of the church, necessarily not their biggest fan. At moments I have been, I've gone through my adolescence learning of their scandal. But I've also seen what has come about of that, not just in positive ways, but in the lost community. Because we're growing up in an Ireland that is struggling to re-find an identity. Yes, it was an issue when we decided to define ourselves by the Catholic Church and define ourselves by all the morality that came with. But when we stood away, what was in its place? It left cynicism in its wake. And speaking of wakes, I have seen too many because of the cynicism that it resulted in, the negativity, the loss of community. We need culture, we need people. We cling to others like sand to wet feet, and there is no more of that. Rural communities are dying, young people don't know where to go, we don't know who we are. What kind of culture is that to grow up in? How are we meant to feel about ourselves? The mental health problems in this country are not to be dismissed because, we can't provide for everything. It is specific. What this government does is specific. Young people, that group is specific. We're debating it for a reason. Why is it that it was decided that the rate of social welfare payment for under 25s could be different to everyone else? Why was that acceptable? Why is our standard of living meant to be cheaper unless it is not meant to be as good, unless you're trying to deliberately get us out of the country because you don't want to deal with us? We've heard so much about activism. I love activism. I'm up here talking, I love to talk, I love to yell at people, I love to argue about things, I love to fight the good fight. We're hearing about Mary Robinson. If you're watching this, Mary, I love you, you inspire me. Yes, you are a fantastic president and a fantastic person, but why are we hearing about what she has done as president specifically, how that's meant to inspire us, how the marriage referendum of May 2015 is meant to inspire us, when that was the very same day, that was the same vote that was cast for a referendum that said we can't run for president. You're telling me to be inspired by a role I can't run for until I'm 35 because we flew back, we went home to vote, we're going to do it again. We keep investing in this country and it won't invest in us. How many people flew back in May 2015 to say, you know what, I've left, this isn't my home anymore, you didn't provide for me, I had to go elsewhere to find a family, to find community, to find work, to find services, but I'm here. I believe in you, Ireland. I'm fighting for you, Ireland. I'm going to build you better. I'm going to make you progressive. I know that I'll be going to Australia or Canada or wherever it is again tomorrow, but today I am here. I am casting that ballot. I believe we can do more. And what did Ireland do? What did it do for that second vote? It said, well, I don't believe in you. We weren't asking to all be president. We just wanted a shot. I mean, I probably would run, I think it'd be good crack. Aiming for prize. However, we said no. We said don't even put them in the race. Young people, they're addicted to their phones. They love Snapchat, they're narcissistic, they're whatever. I mean, yeah, little, we're also engaged. We're also trying, we're hearing about the 8th Amendment, about marriage referendum, all these things we're fighting for, and you keep telling us, do better. Or find it elsewhere and come home after. Why can't we start here? I'll take a point of time in closing.
So, if Ireland is such a failure, could you point to an example elsewhere that does not fail?
Absolutely. And that's the problem. The mental health rates in Ireland, we have one of the highest rates of suicide across all of Europe. That has been consistent for the past 5 years. The UN reports on children show that for one of the most developed nations, we are failing them spectacularly, with 1 in 5 not even having a home that isn't a hotel room. SNAs are being taken from schools. The teacher-student ratios, as any parent will know, are absolutely horrifying. I went to the hairdresser this morning. As you can see, I don't look like Hermione Granger, which I usually do, a bit less busy. Anyway, she was asking about this wonderful event. What were we talking about? I told her the motion. She said, dead right. She's a son who just graduated a couple of years ago as a teacher, and the conversation is so common. You could walk into any service and pick up conversation with someone. They'll know someone who has to immigrate or who's going to because they don't have anything here. They've been failed by someone. We also all know someone we've lost. I've seen too many funerals for my time. I was about to say I'm 21. I'm actually just 22. I almost forgot. We are failing our young people because if you look across other nations, we can't just pick the worst examples and say we're doing better than them. We've more people in university. We've more people whatever. We have the resources. We are making choices, choosing to cut welfare specifically for under 25s. That was deliberate. The housing market, who is it targeting? Rural Ireland is dying and we're not investing in transport. How are people from the small communities surviving? How are they connecting? Not only are they immigrating, the people who stay here, we don't have services anymore. We don't have communities anymore. We don't have our friends here anymore. No wonder we're so depressed, and we're hearing that there's investment in the health system. Show it to me. We deserve better. We came home. Home to vote. Home here. We want this to keep being our home. We invest in you, Ireland. Please, invest in us.
Now from TCD Phil, we have Patrick Lavelle to oppose the motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to excuse me, I've quite a sore throat tonight, so I might sound a bit weird, but I'll battle on anyway. So, what I want to talk, ladies and gentlemen, in Ireland we have a very particular national trait when we discuss issues like this. We tend to discuss things in the abstract, and when we do so, we tend to make things sound much worse than they are. I think we love to do in Ireland is to be self-critical, to catastrophise issues we face beyond any proportion that exists in reality. And even when we do achieve successes, we still find reasons to be critical and to complain about it. And that's really what I want to get into tonight, because you see this everywhere in the comment sections in the Irish Times, just everyday conversations in pubs, cafes, kitchen tables. And there's really very few areas where we do this more than when we talk about youth, when we say we fail our youth. It's just a common refrain we go to. But what I think we need to do is take a step back tonight, because when it comes to parent when you do so, is that a lot of this discussion in the abstract doesn't reflect all reality. We need to get real and actually look at the reality as it is, and that's exactly what I intend to do in two ways. So firstly, I'm going to give you a comparative approach, which I think has been missing. Surely we can't understand ourselves, our own successes, without comparing ourselves to others and without analysing that. And secondly, I'm going to take a contextual approach and look develop what's come before and look at where we've come from. Before that, just a little bit about the cultural point we heard, because I just want to deal with that. I think the Irish language point, the last census indicates there's been a significant increase in the Irish language speakers. It's booming in Dublin, from Dalton's about to get status in the Irish language speaking area. It's an example of how Wales schools are booming. Likewise in music, simply engaging with the outside world isn't a bad thing. People like Dolores O'Riordan, who mix rock at the same time with a very Irish twang, is an example of engaging with the outside world with your indigenous culture. But moving on more quickly to about my issue about how we need to be comparative in this debate. Because what I tried to say about POI was for the last speaker was to ask exactly, could you give another example if we're a failure somewhere that isn't? Because when we look at us by most global measures, we're an extremely successful country. We have a very high level of freedom, high lifestyle standards, as we've heard, an excellent education system. And if you want to be comparative and look at, yes, we have very serious issues with mental health, but they're shared by most of our European peers. Most of the Nordic countries have a more severe problem there than we do. And most people consider them exceptionally, not actually, about very successful countries. Likewise, housing, yes, is a serious issue, but we need to contextualise that in the fact that 5 years ago, no one would have predicted we would have emerged from the economic crisis so quickly. And to solve a housing crisis, simply because building a house takes more than a couple of months, it takes a couple of years before you can solve any economic problem of that nature. That's important. Yes, Ross.
The entire reason we had an economic problem of that nature was because of the immense fiscal irresponsibility that failed our youth and led to these kind of situations arising.
So I'm actually going to briefly say, I'm going to put my contextualisation point in the second half. That was our first big economic boom. I think we can somewhat understand that in that context, we're going to talk about that in a second. But just finishing this point off, because I want to pick up on the education point again, because well, we heard a lot from last speakers about emigration and how we failed our nation. But if we want to look at this from another angle, we can look at the fact that our young people are some of the most skilled people in the world. And in this world we live in, to be given the ability, the fact is we're a small little island, we're never going to have enough, there's certain things we will never have employment in by virtue of that fact. And by nature of the fact that we equip our young people to go be who they want to be, no thank you, to be able to achieve what they want and to have the skills to follow their passions is a good thing. No matter where you look in the world, small island countries have high emigration rates. And surely it was a good thing. Surely if you look at comparison to other AI countries during the recession, our youth unemployment rate has recovered much quicker, and also just the stats aren't as bad, don't compare as badly. But more importantly, to get on to that question of whether Ireland has failed its youth, I want to take that put that in context and develop what my own science brought to you today. No, thank you. So I think what Prof ignored is a very important context, which is that we're a tiny little island of a slightly bigger island of the European mainland. We have no natural resources of note, and for most of our history until 20 years ago, the vast majority of our population lived in great impoverishment. And this is relevant because when we're looking at this motion, we need to ask what we mean by Ireland. Because surely the most sensible meaning is its people. So we're talking about whether older generations, older policymakers, etc., have given us an Ireland that we can be proud of that hasn't failed us. And in that sense, I think it's clearly the case that's not the case. Those people grew up, as we heard, in an Ireland that was very repressive, that had appalling economic stats, that was the poorest country in Western Europe. And today we inherit a country that's quite frankly transformed. If you look at high levels of human rights and freedom, we look at a really booming economy, one of the fastest in Europe, only a couple of years after an economic crisis. And what older generations have given us is a completely transformed Ireland. An Ireland where, I think most importantly, the older Ireland was one where people were straitjacketed, where there was a very narrow definition of who could be Irish, and if you can fit that definition, if you were alternative, if you had something different about you, you could get out. Or if you had a problem we didn't consider desirable, go elsewhere. And I'm not saying those issues are solved entirely. What I am saying is that the older generation have delivered to us a transformation that is, quite frankly, unprecedented globally. The social progress in this country is recognised internationally as having taken place in an unprecedented short period of time by global standards. Likewise, our economic situation, very few countries globally in the last 100 years, besides the Asian tiger countries, which is where the Celtic tiger men came from, have managed to transform from agricultural economies to highly developed countries. You can count about 20 of them. So that's a huge achievement there again. Because particularly at the time when we've seen, unfortunately here in the north, being taken out of Europe by Brexit by an older generation who don't seem as concerned about the interest and future of the younger generation and opportunities they're taking from them. Ireland's youth inherit a country whose older people are very firmly embedded in the idea of handing over a better country and allowing us to shape that country also. And I think that's very important. So ladies and gentlemen, we need to look past the constant negativity we have in this country when we discuss issues, so that Irish youth in reality enjoy some of the best standards in the world. It's just very few better places to be on. And if we're failing, I don't know what country is. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to ask Kevin Brennan on behalf of UCD LNH to propose the motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. How are you doing? I'm nervous tonight. I'm genuinely am. No, I'm really nervous tonight. And I'm not nervous because it's the final. I'm not even nervous because Trinity are here to say, let there be cake. I'm nervous because my mom's here. She's over there. You can all look at her. She loves when people do that. I'm nervous because my mom's here because, like, how am I supposed to say that I've been failed in front of her? Like, genuine, she comes from a different time. Like, she never had the trips to France. You know, she never had the lifts into school. She never had the devastatingly good-looking suits, you know? Don't laugh at that, I look phenomenal. Like, so I genuinely don't know how to say that I've been failed in front of her because she's done so much for me. On the other hand, that woman has been taking pleasure at beating me at Scrabble since I've been 6 years old. So on balance, I think she'll get over it. Ladies and gentlemen, about an hour ago, Sandi stood up here and explained to you that the young people of Ireland, we're not mad, we're just disappointed. We've made our case on two main points. Firstly, we've talked to you about how we failed to look to the future and we failed to plan, and how we failed to adapt our cultural values. I'm going to extend on that, but firstly let's look with what we've heard already. Niamh's entire case is based on the idea that Ireland is better than it was in the 50s, and like, no argument here. Where isn't better than where they were in the 50s? I would put to them, however, that economies similar to Ireland, other economies that have joined the EU, are doing better than us at much other things that we're not. That is the issue here. That comparatively, we are doing worse overall. Like, genuinely, when was the last time we even had a decent Eurovision song? It just doesn't happen anymore. I also want to point out what Lewis was talking about, because he raises a very interesting point that Ireland is improving and progressing even from last year, and I think that's great. The issue I see, the unacceptability of that, is where we started from. The position we were at last year, that was the issue. That's everything Sandi talked to you about. The fact that we did not plan going forward. The fact that we weren't ready to be further on from there. That was 10, 15 years after. We had so much money, and yet we were still in that scenario where we think it's okay, sure, look, we're at a D-. This is essentially what I'm going to be talking to you about when I talk about we failed to plan. I do feel that it's quite low-hanging fruit in this debate to say that we were plunged into a recession. But genuinely, we were. Every single plan that we made were built on top of a bubble. If we had a plan for the future, something that was sustainable, something for our youth, something that we could still experience today, that might be acceptable. No, thank you. But everything that we did has fallen apart. And this lack of foresight is pervasive throughout Ireland. So let's remove politics, let's remove economics, let's talk about something we should all agree about. Let's talk about the environment. And not even climate change. Who wouldn't want to offend the Healy Rays? Let's talk about waste. I think we can all agree that waste is bad. Now the world has about 30 years of copper left. Yeah, now copper is quite important. Copper is in literally all of our wires. We need those. Also helium. Helium is about 30 years of that left. We need that for our MRI machines. We don't have a substitute for those. We will not have 3D human imaging without helium. So you would think that our fine nation would be taking steps to limit our waste, but no, you don't. Because we don't even see the reduce, reuse, recycle ads on the telly anymore. That's the kind of level we've fallen to. In Dundalk, there's this company, and they make pillows and quilts out of recycled plastic, and we think that's really cool. But they have to import their recycled plastic from the likes of from Denmark and the Netherlands, because our plastic is not of high enough quality. Our recycled plastic is not of high enough quality. To explain that in other terms, they have to import rubbish because our rubbish is too rubbish. How awful is that? And then this is an incredibly important point, and this is why what me and Sandi brought you is not just a list of bad things, but housing, depression, and the environment are three different issues. Three different issues with three different institutions involved, different incentives involved, different people involved, and yet, with all three of them, there is a core link that we have simply planned to look to the future. That is the issue here. The future belongs to our youth. When we fail to look to the future, we fail then. Go ahead.
So you say, things are better than 1950, who cares? I mean, that didn't just happen. That happened because people planned for it to happen and then worked hard to make it happen.
Two things there. Firstly, everything Sandi told you about, remember when we had so much money, and that wasn't just 10 years ago. We've been through a couple of recessions in the meantime. But look, let's give them some credit, all right? A lot has changed. Ireland in the 70s and 80s was a very different place. Our economy was stuck in a cycle of boom and bust. People were arguing about what type of border we should have in the north. Abortion was entirely illegal, and our young people were emigrating. Could you imagine? God that we have come so far. The point again that I'm trying to make here. Cheers. The point again that I'm trying to make here is that it doesn't matter all the good we've done or the bad we've done. It's what we would have expected to have done. That's why, like, having growth in our economy is due to joining the EU. Like, we would expect that. But having the 4th highest suicide rate among high-income countries, they're the people we should be comparing themselves to. That's the reason why we have been failed. And also, the opposition's entire argument is it's clever. Like, I'm not going to lie, it's very clever. Also, entirely based in Dublin. They say that we are far more liberal than we ever have been before. Please wear a repeal jumper going around Leitrim. They say that we have a much better economy than ever before. If you go west of the Shannon, they are struggling to field GAA teams. And Daniel's response to Aodhán's POI is blaming the church, entirely forgetting that the church is still quite strong in rural Ireland. That is still Ireland. They are basing their entire argument on Dublin. We think that's unfair. But then Trinity, so. The second point that Sandi brought up was the idea that we have failed to adapt our culture and its values. Now, we think this is very important because our culture was founded on just having a bit of crack, taking things handy and just being independent. Now, previously this worked for us. This worked quite well. But that goodwill permeated throughout our communities and drew us all together. That helped us in rural Ireland. But drink culture is a disaster. Every 7 hours, someone in Ireland dies due to alcohol use. And 30% of our young people under 18 admit to drinking. The worst part of that is none of you are surprised, and you all think that the number should be higher. We have a mountain of evidence saying that our obesity rates are too high, our alcoholism rates are too high, and the closest thing we've ever come to change is Operation Transformation. And ladies and gentlemen, Operation Transformation is probably the dullest television show I have ever seen. We just keep pushing these ideas underneath the carpet and don't talk about them. They say that doesn't happen anymore. They blatantly lie. Now look, I don't enjoy claiming to have been let down when my parents did so much for me. And I plan to make them proud. That's what all young people plan to do. We have our own challenges for the future. We're going to deal with the consequences of globalization. We're going to deal with growing sea levels. We're going to deal with the fact that not everyone is included. We are going to include everyone, be they gay, black, or culty. We plan on doing all of those things. But first, we must defeat our past before we can find our future. We must pay back debts we never borrowed. We must break down stigmas we were born into and fight a drinking culture that's plagued Ireland for years. Young people will not fail Ireland. That's why it's so heartbreaking for me to say that Ireland has failed us.
Rory O'Sullivan is going to seize the concepts and the issues and oppose the motion as part of the TCD law team. Thank you very much indeed.
The year was 1935. Ireland had no money. Colonial rule had left cultural ruins so that Irishness was embedded in repressive institutions and nobody knew that mental illness existed. And then an amazing thing happened. Ndebele clicked his fingers and suddenly we had a world-class education system, excellent mental health services and free abortion on demand for all, and nobody ever suffered again, and they all lived happily ever after. Except they didn't, because that never happened, because it's magic and is unrealistic, just like this proposition is utterly unfair and unrealistic. Government, always, everywhere, is the art of sailing a leaky ship that doesn't want to go anywhere. They are wrong to suggest that our government has failed just because they tacked with the wind and went forward bit by bit instead of barreling in against it and being blown back. Our case in the TCD Law Society is that the direction and strategy of the Irish government over the last number of generations were not an accident. The impacts of that strategy were not an accident. They were in fact deliberate. They were a mark of devotion and effort, and what led to them was massive. The word that we had for that was, or the term that we had for that, was the Irish dream. And any charge of failure, given the effort that went into that and the impact of it would be unjust. I think it is madness for first proposition to say that there was a lack of foresight when so clearly the impact has been so great and so much foresight was needed from 1958 to the present day, even earlier, in order to achieve that. Niamh, my partner, told you that this debate should be about more than a petty list of successes and failures, but that incidentally, if this debate were about a petty list of successes and failures, our list would be longer and better, and we would win that argument. Why? Because we are economically better off than ever before. And that's not just, many countries are economically better off than in the 1950s. We went from being the poorest country in Western Europe to one of the richest countries in the world in the space of about 60 years. And they say, look, that's just economics. That's not any of the important things in life. Let me tell you about some of the important things in life. I can go down to the street near where I live, I'm about a 10-minute walk from a katsu curry and a chicken jalfrezi. For €20 right now, I won't do it right now because I have to give a speech, but right now I can go on my phone and book a flight to London, which was completely impossible decades before. Now those may sound trivial, but they're symptomatic of something that's actually important, which is that our worlds have opened up, because life isn't, the economics box and the culture box, and ever shall the boxes remain separate. Those things have an impact on one another. And because our worlds are opened up and our outlooks and our understanding of what's possible as young people is different to what anyone could have conceived of before, there are clearly cultural and significant impacts to that. There are clearly impacts to what we're aware of. It isn't an accident, I point out, that so many of these issues, like LGBT rights, mental health, women's rights and things, have become so popular in the last 10 to 20 years. They became popular partially as a result of that economic vision, because that economic vision was combined with a cultural vision, which was that Ireland would open itself to the international world. That was what Niamh told you, and they missed that. They wanted to brand us. They always look for labels. These teams. We were the economics team. But of course, actually, there's far more when you pick back that label to that economics argument. And there were other arguments which were different to that, which are that young people are politically empowered now in a way that they never were before. Because obviously, theoretically, people were always politically empowered in many countries in the world. But culturally and socially, if we can't talk about something, if it's stigmatized to talk about mental health, if abortion is so stigmatized that somebody would rather die in a field than tell anybody that they're pregnant, then you can talk about those issues. And so that opening up is necessary in order for people to be able to talk about and solve any of the problems that they talked about. They have no way of doing so if they barrel against the wind instead of trying to change its direction. Yes?
Your team has told us that generations of Irish youth lived in economic impoverishment, cultural isolation and social repression. Do you think that Ireland failed them?
Okay, I'm going to use a weird example, right? So the manager of the Italian rugby team right now is an Irish guy. This is how I know this, right? So the Italian rugby team are obviously doing very badly at the moment. But his whole project is to invest in the structures behind that, underage structures, and coaching structures, so that the quality of Italian rugby will improve, so that when in about 30 years Italian rugby is actually a force in global rugby, no one will know that it was because of him, but it will have been because of him. And if he stays on for all those 30 years, and if at the end of those 30 years Italy comes second in the Six Nations, and if somebody from Italy stands up and says, well, he failed in his job, then I think you would be right to punch that man in the face, because all the work that he has done is surely relevant to that question. The starting point and the broader context must be taken into account when answering that question. So here's the key to what Niamh told you. All of that is because of deliberate vision, no thank you, and intention. So people worked hard at those things. Now, second proposition is big innovation, or big debate-winning thing is to say, well, how could anyone have failed? We're saying that nobody could have failed. Well, of course they could have failed if they hadn't done that. And if, as second propositions say, they had gotten chained down in perfection instead of accepting better in the knowledge that whoever would come after them would also accept better and move forward. Now, some of those issues involve taking a wide-angle lens, right? Like, incidentally, the government did raise taxes before they cut SNAs during the economic crisis, but maybe they lowered taxes because they thought it would produce more money, so that in the long term they'd be able to spend more on SNAs, so that the young people of the future would benefit more, and people who are, 4 years old now would benefit considerably more, even if the people who are 16 would not. Those are calculations that governments have to make that are on a much broader scale than the narrow arguments that those guys were making. You have to make comparisons. I mean, 70 years ago when there were no SNAs, there was no money to pay for SNAs, no one believed that the problems that SNAs are there for existed, and now they're in most schools. Click of the fingers? I don't think so. Niamh told you also that people now have the power to make those changes. The opening up of Ireland that we talked about, that Irish dream, is exactly why they can stand up and talk about an issue like SNAs and learning disabilities and get a round of applause. The fact that that is possible among Irish people today is something that we should not underestimate. Look, I speak to you today as the great-grandson of a war-scarred small farmer representing an institution from which any generation before me was banned, speaking in front of judges and the editor of the Irish Times. Now, maybe that is all economics, but it doesn't sound like failure to me, and in fact it sounds like something remarkable. Thank you.
Adrienne, Peelo, on behalf of UCD Law, has an opportunity to persuade us to support the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You all remember Cian. He was the nice boy. Not great at shoelaces, but eternally an optimist. And not a failure. And I think the most important thing that he has taught me is that things happen for a reason. You see, we didn't just forget about the children who suffered sexual abuse. We had to forget to maintain our pure, Catholic and religious ethos. We don't just look away from the 3,000 children who are homeless now. We have to do it because it's necessary for our financial growth right now. And we don't just allow sectarianism to happen. It actively benefits individuals who are in power. You don't have to give your kids everything. I think Proposition are right on so many levels. But you can't benefit from their pain. You can't win and make them the losers. And if we did, even if we only have a short list, then no amount of katsu curry and trips to London will convince me that you can honestly look in the mirror and tell yourself that you have done the youth justice at any point in Ireland's history. So the first thing that we want to discuss is going right back to our beginning, and I think opening opposition should like this because they want to talk about how horrific it was. They tell you it's a leaky ship and it got a lot better because we kept plugging the holes with little children. Like, that's bizarre, I would think. And it sounds morally bizarre to people who have any kind of standing. Genuinely, it wasn't the fact that we were in poverty and the Catholic Church was able to take on the duty, because many of them were lovely and I fully respect them for doing this. The fact that there was never anyone regulating them. We never looked the other way. We never questioned them. And when children started reporting this abuse from the 1960s, we told them that they were liars. We actively looked away. We shut them down because we had to, because we weren't ready to accept that that could be challenged or moved away from. And by the way, this is the bit that genuinely annoys me a lot, because Proposition said, well, isn't it wonderful that we have liberalised and are now free of the church? That's the only reason we started listening to them. We waited until it was convenient for us, until we could think of the church as a bogeyman and lambast it in public, and then we said that they might be reasonable to listen to. And the reason I know this is because look at when they take on the state nowadays. Look at the Quirk report, look at the redress that we're meant to be given, and the fact that we are fighting members from the Magdalen Law Gym who were submitted there from institutional schools, and the state is trying to save every single penny that they can. Why does this matter in the debate? I mean, I suppose it's because our bad relationship with children has gone back through the generations. That it's not good enough for these snowflakes to decide that we're the only generation that should be succeeded, and that all of their suffering was worth it. So many children are constantly forgotten because at every stage there is a present and there is a future, but there are never the young people who need us right now. That is not acceptable. Now, thank you. That is not something that you can say in terms of succeeding them. But they did want to talk about economics as their main benefit. They said that we should pride ourselves based on the economic advances that we've made. Well, let's be honest, right? When we had money, we funneled it to an extent into our education. When push came to shove, let's look at the fact that we mortgaged our entire nation to settle the debt. that we still try to decrease taxes right now for fear that it will be difficult for us in a struggling economy, and we have no concept of what's going to happen in the future. I mean, for God's sake, the thing that genuinely confuses me is that, you know, the pension scheme, like it's a pyramid fund, we know there's a greying population, and we know there will be left for them at some point, and yet that's how we base any kind of stability on ourselves. And what I mean is that it's only ever when it's convenient for us that we have given to young people. It is only ever when it doesn't have to hurt. And I think that that's abhorrent. I think that is unacceptable. Ronan.
Would you suggest that it did not hurt the ordinary Irish people who came out about child abuse and were listened to in the 90s to do that? Would you suggest that that was not a sacrifice that they made?
The victims? I mean, absolutely not. Those are the people we've been ignoring since the 1960s, is my point. But I suppose he's right. Genuinely, I think that second opposition want to base their entire case on the ordinary Jon Snows, the guys who put in the work and who absolutely work as hard as they can. I mean, let's ask whether they're working for the youth or whether they actually care most about their own interests. Because individually, we are incredible parents. We all want to send our kids to the best fee-paying school we can. We all want to see them go to college. But hasn't it struck us that there are now less poor people entering college than when we introduced free fees in the South? Haven't we realised that the inequality is stretched across the board because we don't pay for SNAs, we don't pay for resource teachers, we don't pay for school funding across the board, we only pay in individual instances. I mean, if you want to take one example that is the perfection of this, it's the fact that we're still funding private schools because our individual children get a huge benefit out of that, but the overall nation obviously loses from us allowing this kind of perpetuation of some individuals winning and some individuals losing. And I suppose that's the point. We've always looked to the future and we've always done what we wanted. And, just to be clear, when we make these economic decisions on a macro level, when the government stands up, no thank you, and says that it's most important to look after the present workers now who get up early in the morning and forget the future, we voted for those people. We're able to take governments accountable and to make those accountable in terms of who we care about because individuals voted for them. And that brings us to the final strain that I think really matters in this debate, and that's the question of how we operate politics in this country. Now, second opposition had a point, which is that, well, I mean, we have an excellent electoral system, that's excellent for the youth. I mean, honestly, at the moment which you've assigned saying 18 plus at the entrance to a voting booth, I'm not sure how much they can convince me that this is something for the children that we're doing and not something for ourselves. Look at each stride forward that they've been so proud about. The plan, no thank you, that they had in the past. It was always for a better Ireland to live in now. It benefited the adults just as much as the children, and any time that was different, we took away from it. Myself and Cian think that there is one example that's excellent to exemplify this. We think that Northern Ireland was a chance. We think that peace was finally achieved with the Good Friday Agreement, and we made promises to set up a Bill of Rights, promises to build institutions that people could engage with, but we never built those communities, we never invested in schools that would educate children together, we invested in more walls to segregate them. Again, there was a reason for that. It is handier for Sinn Féin and for the DUP to maintain their political platform based on that segregation. The children that grow up in a Northern Ireland that is this close to pushing them back to violence are the victims who are propping up political power for other individuals. I mean, I also wonder whether I'm going to have a kid someday, and it's a lot less funny than Cian's, because it's terrifying. I mean, honestly, I think that I might laugh when they need me to support them, that I might cry when they need to get support. But I know that I will never look away when they say that they need my help. I know that I will not put myself first. If you do that, even once as a nation, you cannot take yourself seriously and tell me that you have not failed the youth. That is not acceptable. We're very proud to propose.
Ronan Daly is from TCD is the final debater, and I'm much looking forward to hearing what he has to say in opposition.
Chair, adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, this proposition sees no end to the problems facing Ireland's youth. And look, they're right to say that we should seek to do better, and we do admire their idealism. But they should realise they can only see so far because they stand on the shoulders of giants. The giants we're talking about are John Hume, they're Mary Robinson, they're the survivors of child abuse. But more than that, we're talking about our ordinary Irish men and women who listened to this people, who through conversations in kitchens in Clare and at marches in Dublin, created a society more open, progressive and prosperous for this youth than anyone could have dreamed of when this country was in its infancy. In light of this, I have two questions at the end of this debate. Firstly, failing, flailing, or just smooth sailing. What does it mean to fail? And secondly, is Ireland a Tierna Nog, or is it just a Tierna, oh no, we haven't done very well at all? Irish language joke, it still goes down well here, that's a success. So, what is failure? Aodhán and Cian talk about how each generation of youth was failed, but the point of what Daniel brings you is that each generation before them worked to make things a little better, and they sacrificed to do so, and we should credit that sacrifice. No, thank you. Kevin and Sandi, on the other hand, imagine that Ireland materialised in 1999, like the Macarena. The proposition's answers were simplistic in the face of a complicated history, and this was why they lost this debate. Because look, they said that Ireland owed its youth far more and failed to deliver. But failure depends on what you're working with. Ireland could only owe what it could realistically be expected to deliver. Daniel told you how against the odds Ireland created a remarkably democratic and open political system so the youth of today are more empowered to create change than in anywhere else in the world. He told you about the bravery of those, no thank you, who challenged the dominant belief systems of this country to give today's youth the chance to live their lives in an Ireland more accepting and open than any generation that came before it. He asked you to think about the strength required of the victims of the Troubles, not the DUP, not Sinn Féin, but those victims to forgive the unforgivable so this generation could grow up on an island of peace. God, Daniel said some great stuff, didn't he? I mean, I really enjoyed it anyway. Really funny too, in fairness, but these people gave us more than we could have ever have asked them, and in doing so, they defied history's odds. No, thank you. To say that they failed the youth is to say somehow they needed to give us more. So many countries in similar circumstances did not achieve these same things. Cian asked for an example of what failure might look like. It looks like Poland, where the Catholic Church continues to influence political life. Or it's South Africa that could not construct an inclusive political system after the British left. Or it's Israel and Palestine, where reconciliation seems a distant dream. It is easy to look at today's Ireland and think that progress was inevitable, when in reality nothing was further from the case. No, thank you. Ireland's most powerful left down its vulnerable youth is the next line we hear from them. And we won't deny that political, economic and religious elites failed to live up to the responsibilities that came with their positions of power. What we will deny is that these people define Ireland. We refuse to let institutions which are either internationally imposed or historically entrenched abdicate culpability for their actions. Actions, contrary to what Aodhán tells you, were often criminal, hidden from the Irish people and only uncovered through the bravery of people in all four corners of this island, those people who we know to be the real Ireland. Yes, there were many times when Irish people just accepted the way things were. The psychological grip that the Catholic Church had on this country was one ever tightened by fear, propaganda and attacks on those who dared question its power. Like Andrew Madden, who risked everything to become the first victim of abuse to come forward in 1995. We should not condemn those who were paralysed by that grip for failing us, because I don't know if you or I could say for certain that we would have been done better if we were in that position. But think about the people who were in that position and did do better, did create change in this country. We should thank those who did have that courage. I'll take Aodhán now.
As a nation, we gave 3 examples of when specific pain led to specific benefit. Why is that ever acceptable, even for a moment, from any parent?
It's funny you say specific and then are entirely vague about what the specificity is in that point of information. I can't remember your case word for word, but I can tell you that I'm proud of the youth of Ireland for what they did. No, thank you. You had your chance to tell me what those 3 things were. So look, Aodhán says we forgot about those people. No, look, we didn't, because he said that 1990s Ireland somehow wasn't Catholic. That was a decade in which the Catholic Church still massively influenced a referendum about divorce, where they had to say so, and the only reason that referendum actually passed was because it was raining on the West Coast. That is an Ireland where it was required massive courage to step forward, and furthermore it took massive courage to listen to those people and create the change which fundamentally meant changing your assumptions around the world, which is an immensely difficult thing to do, yet the people of Ireland did it. The understanding, no thank you, myself and Dan have of what failure means is the one you should listen to. We understood that when you talk about Ireland, we can't just mean bankers in the 90s, or the church in the 50s, or the cabinets of Fianna Fáil governments. It is because of the decisions, big and small, made by ordinary people, that where the youth of 100 years ago wanted nothing but to awaken from the nightmare of history, today's youth can dream of a brighter tomorrow. But look, Even if you could hold Irish people responsible for the problems that you face, Ireland still hasn't failed its young people because today they have more reasons for optimism than pessimism. It's time now to honestly weigh those reasons. Look, and honestly about weight, which I'll say, very difficult at times. That's what this second question is all about. Socially, there were a number of questions in this debate. I think a very compelling one that we heard from the proposition was the question of mental health. But I think that challenge is a lot more phenomenal, and as a phenomenon, indeed phenomenal as a phenomenon, than they would have you believe. Because it was inconceivable to many generations that we could have so much in economic terms, but still want emotionally. It was a phenomenon based on the unexpected rise of things like the internet that nobody could have seen coming. Nobody could have seen those effects coming. But what were we armed with to deal with that? Today's youth have the tools of education, political engagement, and the understanding of ourselves that isn't limited by a religious belief. That means that can be our challenge to face. That can be our challenge to address. So we feel that we are in a position to deal with that. But look, this team from the College Historical Society was proud of an Ireland that had overcome the terror of the Troubles to build a country where today's young people don't live under the shadow of violence. That gnawing fear of violence that so much of Ireland felt for so long is far more important than any transient financial crisis. That peace was built on the generation that worked so hard and sacrificed so much, and they deserve our gratitude. Look, Sinn Féin and DUP did play political games, and we condemn them for that. But think of how much courage it takes to be within that community and still forgive, accept the negotiations, accept the sorts of compromises which have to be made to create peace. That means so much and needs to be weighed in this debate. Look, at the end of the Irish Times debating competition 2018, we really do have one person to thank. They've got so much to the table, been in every round, and worked tirelessly to make this competition what it is. Obviously, that person is me, actually. Because myself and Dan talk to you about the real people of Ireland, why we're immensely thankful for the progress they've made, and why for that reason we're proud to be Irish, and we're looking forward to a brighter tomorrow. Thank you very much.
I now understand from the running orders that the adjudicators retired to make what must be a very difficult decision, and that I'm then invited to speak on the debate, though I think I'll speak more about the debate than on the debate. So if I can ask the adjudicators to retire.
I started debating when I was 9 years old. My mum will probably tell you that I actually started debating before I could form full sentences, but in a formal sense, I started debating when I was 9 years old. I mainly stuck at it because it was fun, and also because I'm incredibly competitive, but not very sporty and terribly uncoordinated. So it was kind of the only real crossover that I had available to me. But among the many reasons that I stayed, aside from the enjoyment that I gained from it and the wonderful, wonderful friends that I made, is that I truly believe that there is something valuable about it. That debating challenges us to look at our views and to assess what we think is important to us and why we hold those. I really believe that there is no better breeding ground for that than this competition. And I don't just say that because I might be somewhat biased standing up in front of you as the convener. I promise I thought that before I was the convener. We were asked earlier on if the most important thing in debating is logic, is it reason, is it fact, is it emotion? And the wonderful and beautiful thing about the Irish Times as a format and as a competition is that that is where all of those things meet, where there is no one of those factors that is the most important, but it is actually your ability to interweave those different components of your speech to give a full speech and to make a persuasive argument that is what makes a good speaker in the Irish Times, and what I'm sure was taken into consideration, though I confess I don't I don't know the results, but it was evident in all 12 speeches tonight, so I have no doubt it was taken into consideration in our adjudication. This competition has been running for 58 years now, and the quality, I know we had some of the former winners and some of the former finalists mentioned earlier on. I think that the quality of that in many ways speaks for itself, but that the Irish Times continues to support it, as it has done for so very long, allows us to continue to have that place within our universities, within our society, and for that I know that myself on a personal level, I know that generations of debaters who have gone before us, I'm sure that the current generation, and I hope generations of debaters that are to come, and that Saturday mornings when I will pick up the paper many years down the line and see who has won the most recent edition, I'm sure that they will all agree in the immense value that the Irish Times continue to provide to having those conversations and challenging us on the worldview that we wish to create. So a huge, huge thank you to the Irish Times. One person who contributes to that immensely, and who I would like to say a personal thank you both on my own behalf, but I'm sure on behalf of all of the participants as well, and that is Janet Stafford. We have a small token of our appreciation for you, Janet. I'm not sure, have we lost Janet? No, we haven't, that's okay. So Janet. Getting there, and no, none of you actually care about what I have to say. I just want to hear what the adjudicators have to say, but has to be done. This competition started on a very, very cold day in November in Cork, and it has taken us around the country, the length and breadth of the country, ever since. We have been to Belfast, not just this evening, but before. We were treated to a wonderful evening down in the Curragh. We have been to Cork on a number of occasions, and of course we've been to a number of institutions in Dublin as well. And it's truly something to be proud of that this competition is as inclusive of institutions as it is, that so many institutions from across Irish education take part, including, as we mentioned, institutions such as the Cadet School, and it really means a great deal that it is in fact an all-Ireland competition, and that's no more true than standing here this evening in Queen's University, Belfast. We have debates that have covered everything from the GAA to funding IVF, from taking a knee in the NFL to the Irish Language Act, and everything else in between. This competition meant a great deal to me when I took part. It still does, and that is a large part of why I'm standing here today. And if it means anything as much to those that have gone before me and will come after me, then we'll be doing okay. When I started convening and thought about the year that I wanted to run and the debates that I wanted to see, the most important thing to me, because of what I believe this competition can do, was to set debates that mattered. And that meant was in every sense of the term, whether those were to do with the government or matters of social policy, or even things that mattered because they were what you were discussing down at the pub. And I certainly tried to do that in the motions that were selected, but to a certain extent, but what that comes down to is how people actually engage with those motions and the debates that happen there. I was certainly not failed in their execution. I sat at the back of rooms, eager to chime in. I laughed, and on a number of occasions I almost cried. And I will say that the main reason that I didn't was not because they were not that emotional, it was just because I thought it would be fairly inappropriate for someone who was judging to actually start crying. People say that, back in my day things were so much better. I don't think that's true. I think looking at the 12 speakers that we had here tonight, I think they might have wiped the floor with some of us a few years ago, but nonetheless, you were all absolutely phenomenal. I think perhaps the one area that we did slightly better at back in my day was that we all usually managed to bring our own suits or dresses to the final, but I'm not going to name any names this evening. But you can talk to me afterwards and I will definitely name them. However, what I thought we should try and have was a competition and indeed debates, and more generally speaking, what debate is to us all, or should be, are topics that make us think and that make us feel, and that ask us who we were, who we are, and who we will be, and what we want that to be, what we want to be said about us when people look back. I don't think that there is anywhere else where we get the same opportunity to do that as we do in this competition, because of the nature of it, how we get to think about things for quite a while in advance and decide what that is, who we are as people, who we are as a nation, and who we want to be as a global society. Tonight I was very, very jealous of our 12 speakers, and it wasn't for the opportunity to get my name on the trophy, though I wouldn't have said no to that, and it wasn't because of the wonderful tour that they have coming up, though I'm sure that will indeed be fantastic. It was the opportunity to stand back up and speak and to be able to get involved in those things again and to be tackling those kind of issues and forcing myself to think and feel in that same way. You all did an absolutely tremendous job, and regardless of what Paul says after me, you should be so very proud of yourselves for what you've done, not just tonight, but indeed all year round. The reason this competition continues to be a success, the reason that it will be a success in the future, and the reason that it matters that it continues, is because of generations past, present, and future who take to those topics and who come to a room, whether that's a cold classroom on a winter day, or whether that's a grand final in black tie, and bring their ideas and challenge each other for how we can and should be better. So you, in particular, our participants tonight, but indeed all who took part this year, you are why tonight matters, and you are why I'm incredibly honoured to have convened this year. Thank you all very much. So that was a really risky move. But without any further ado, I promise I am now done, and I will hand you over to Paul to give out the results. Thank you.
You may be concerned to know that I had several pages of speech prepared, and I got a lot of thank yous, but I think virtually all the ground has already been covered. So really just to Ben, to my fellow adjudicators, I think it's probably best to put you out of your misery. This really is crude and unusual punishment. Just one small acknowledgement before we go. The Irish Times has been involved in this competition for 60 years, and I guess at this stage we pretty much know what we're doing and how to go about it. But the lion's share of the work falls to the convener. And if I could just bring Janine back again, I just want to acknowledge that if I could. So as I say, if we could just take the thank yous as read, and I think maybe it's time to move on. Much is often made of the very illustrious previous winners of this competition, and I guess that's understandable because if you do go through the lists, a lot of people have gone on to very great things. But from the perspective of the Irish Times, I'd like to think that the competition stands as a memorable milestone for everybody who takes part, and I hope that will be the case for all of you this evening. So finally, the results are as follows. The individual runner-up is Kevin Brennan from UCD. The runner-up team is Niamh, Egleston and Rory O'Sullivan from
Crean.